you very much, Nick, for this very important invitation. I'm very keen to speak to Labor people from John Curtin, and this is a crucial time for us. The Labor movement is about to secure a historic and tectonic shift in the position of Indigenous people in Australia with the forthcoming referendum. I was just so galvanised by Prime Minister Albanese's speech on election night, where it really came out of the blue, his first commitment to implementing the whole of the Uluru Statement from the heart. I was not expecting that. And his complete forthrightness on the correctness of this referendum and the Uluru Statement has been one of the most amazing things I've witnessed in Labor leadership. I was a acolyte of, and still am, great acolyte of Paul Keating's. I was oriented towards Labor in my youth, and certainly when I first entered public life, my concentration was on land rights and the Mabo decision and native title, and played a role with Prime Minister Keating and my colleagues from the Indigenous leadership across the country in the 90s. So I was a poster boy for the Labor side of the struggle. But at the end of the 90s, I thought about, well, we just suffered a massive loss at the hands of the Conservatives with the response to the WIC High Court decision by the Howard government, the so-called 10-point plan that was legislated narrowly in 1998 when Senator Harradine from Tasmania betrayed the WIC people. He had committed to the WIC people to preserve the Native Title Act and the implications of the WIC decision, but we suffered a grievous setback when that legislation was passed because Harradine changed his mind and changed his position. And over the course of the last 2 decades, Indigenous people and native title holders in particular lost. It is incalculable what was lost as a result of those amendments. The country has gone through probably 2 waves of the largest resource development revolutions that's taken place across the planet, a massive resource development over these decades since the WIC decision, and yet the ability of native title holders to secure some of that wealth for the landowners on whose land this mining takes place was severely cruelled by what happened in Parliament in 1998 as a result of the 10-point plan. So I was shattered at the end of the 90s that we had lost so much, and for a great win like the 1993 Native Title Act and the High Court decision to then lose that, or lose a significant leverage and power in 1998, I was completely disillusioned. And I was, to be honest, disillusioned with the Labor Party and its inability to find a way back to office. And my despair at those 12 years of Howard's rule, when Labor could not get its act together. It had disowned the Keating heritage, and And I then had to give thought to the cause of my own people. And I came up with the conviction that we for some of our agenda, we needed, my shorthand was, we needed Nixon to go to China. And on the agendas that I had, we needed a conservative prime minister to strike out in relation to the issues that I think were very pressing. And because I'm a strong believer that rights and responsibilities have got to go together, land rights and welfare reform, human rights and social responsibility and economic development. All of those are not contradictory positions. We have to find the radical centre between those positions. And in order for our community to rise up out of the hole that we're in, so I've been an advocate for alcohol management, and as much as I have been concerned about imprisonment and incarceration of our people, but in that process, I think I lost progressives. I don't think I was successful in trying to explain what our strategy was. And so there was an assumption by my friends in the Labor movement that somehow I'd gone over to the dark side of the Conservatives. But I tell you what, in 2007, Howard went to his last election with a commitment to constitutional recognition. And the ball was finally kicked off on this by a Conservative who committed that within 18 months of him being re-elected, he would take a question to the Australian people in a referendum. Now, he did not, Howard's thinking at the time was that he wanted a change to the preamble to the Constitution. And I recall literally on the eve of him announcing his election commitment, I recall having a fairly tense phone call with him about my view that simple preambular recognition would be insufficient and unacceptable, that there needed to be substantive recognition in the Constitution. And Howard committed at the time that, we would revisit this if he got re-elected. Anyway, there was no chance. Kevin Rudd mirrored John Howard's commitment. He said, I will do the same thing. And then 2 days before the election, he announced that constitutional recognition would be an agenda for his second term. So that basically the commitment to constitutional recognition was put on the back burner until the second term of a Rudd government. And that second term never came, of course. And so this whole issue had been enlivened by Howard in 2007. The ball had been kicked into play, but then it kind of sat there for those first 3 years. And it was only in the negotiations by Julia Gillard to form the minority government she did, that a commitment to picking up the recognition commitment commenced. So Gillard formed the expert panel in 2011, and I was a member of that, and that is a time that I had the good fortune to have a young intern from Monash Law School join me on this, what is now a 13-year agenda. The set of ideas that emerged in that expert panel process, did not include the main idea, the most substantive idea, was a commitment to non-discrimination, that there would be a provision of the Constitution that would outlaw discrimination against any group in the Australian community. And but when the report was released at the end of 2011, there was a violent reaction to those recommendations, and particularly to the non-discrimination proposal, by constitutional conservatives who said this would be a one-line Bill of Rights. The proposal would amount to this dreaded Bill of Rights provision that would empower courts and particularly the High Court, to supervise the laws of Parliament according to judgments around discrimination. And the reaction was just so violent and so determined that Shireen and I soon came to the view that there was no way those proposals from the expert panel would survive. And we started casting around for a pivot, an alternative. That I decided for Shireen and I to go across the North Shore of Sydney and sit down with the Australian Catholic University people, Professor Craven and Julian Lisa, and Professor Anne Toomey. We sat down with them and we put it to them. You know, if you're going to object to a non-discrimination clause in the Constitution, Indigenous people have suffered and still suffer from discrimination. How are you going to assure them that they can be treated fairly in the future? And so the concept that Indigenous people should have a voice to the Parliament, rather than having the shield of the law, we would have the sword of the voice. And we could point out to Parliament our views on laws and policies before they are made. And so that really was the origins of the idea of the voice. It would be a political mechanism. It would be a mechanism for Indigenous people to participate in the democratic politics of the country and to advise Parliament on bills affecting Indigenous people, but also to advise the executive government on the policies and programs that affect Indigenous people. And the process over this last decade has been around the building of an Indigenous consensus around the voice, and the 2017 Uluru Statement from the Heart really was the high water mark of self-determination, in my view. There's never been anything like the rigour and the participation that eventually resulted in the Uluru Statement after dialogue meetings were held in locations all around the country, from the Torres Strait to Tasmania, Western Australia to Central Australia. All corners of the country were covered by these dialogues, and the resulting statement from the heart at Uluru, the extraordinary consensus that was achieved there. I've certainly not participated or witnessed anything near the amount of thought, rigour, debate, discussion that went into the formation of the Uluru Statement. This has been a long process. I know of no other policy or constitutional proposal or legislative reform that has been subject to as long and involved a process as this. This has been going on for 12, 13 years now. And if you count back to when it was first kicked off by Howard, we are entering the 16th year since this process was started. And at every turn, the potential objections that constitutional conservatives could raise against the proposal, at every turn we've sought to anticipate them and to make provision to address the concerns they have. So the arguments that have been thrown around in the last year in particular are really baseless, because the questions they raise have actually already been answered. And and we've had, a number of High Court judges contribute to reviewing the provision that the Prime Minister has announced, and which the Attorney General has now introduced into the Parliament, and which is now the subject of the parliamentary committee process. And the extraordinary thing about the process we're going through now, the debate, and the truculent lies that are being generated by the No campaign. The extraordinary thing is that Julian Leeser was as much an author of the provision as anyone in the country. Julian, when the story is properly told about this history, Julian will be seen as one of the architects of the concept of the voice. But I can tell you that, and I won't go on too much longer, I can tell you that every Prime Minister I've dealt with, from Abbott in 2013, and then Turnbull, and then Morrison, they all went to the various elections with a policy commitment to Indigenous constitutional recognition. There's never been an election where the two major parties have not been committed to constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians since 2007. This has been a consistent commitment. And indeed, in the 2019 election, Morrison went to that election with a commitment that included setting aside a significant budget, $170 million, to conduct the referendum. So Morrison went to the 2019 election with a referendum budget in the forward estimates. So this gulf between what the leadership of the Conservatives was committed to versus their inability or their cowardice in terms of getting their party room into order and to lead their party room forward was the reason why the politics of this was thwarted for so long. Abbott wanted to do this, but he couldn't. Turnbull wanted to do this, but he couldn't. And Morrison wanted to do this, but he couldn't. And they were all looking over their shoulders. In the case of Turnbull, he was looking over his shoulder at Abbott coming for him again. Abbott wanted to use any kind of commitment that Turnbull might make to going forward with constitutional recognition as a motivation to cut his throat. And so it's been the inability of the Conservative leadership to bring their party room with them that has been I think the fundamental problem the Conservatives have had, and they still have it now. Dutton's position is defined by his inability. He has got an intransigent party room. You know, he's too weak to have shifted them and shown the necessary leadership to move his party out of the rut that it's in. So I'm of the great belief that we are in a good position. I think we can carry this. I think the Australian people will say, yeah, that's a fair deal. That's a fair deal. You know, that's a decent deal. This is the least. This is a simple proposal. It's a profound proposal, but it's simple, and it's just. And so I have a great belief that the referendum will succeed when it is put to the people in October. But the headwinds and the fractiousness of the no campaign and the sheer difficulties we're having from the media is of course, you know, it's just extraordinary the uphill battle, you know, the work that we have cut out for us. But in the final analysis, my view is that we're on a winner here, and I just urge the Labor movement to stay the course. To let's complete this. Let's convince our fellow Australians about the correctness of this cause, and let's bring this home in October.